Hello, my name is Christiane Seehausen. Me and Siri, we are working at the Nansen Center for Peace and Dialogue, as mentioned, and I have been working there for more than 17 years and working with dialogue, implementing trainings and having facilitating dialogues in different places. And Siri, perhaps you can say something about yourself.
Yes, hello everyone. Nice to meet you virtually. My name is Siri and I'm a dialogue coordinator, and me and Christiana are doing a lot of these digital things together. So I'm pleased to be here.
So this webinar is about how Nansen, the Nansen Center for Peace and Dialogue, is working with dialogue. I know from the organizers that you all have been working with dialogues. You have had your dialogues in communities. And so it's not that I want to say that this is the way you did it in your way. Perhaps it's the same way as we are working. Perhaps something will be different from what you have been doing. So what we will present here today is the way how Nansen Center for Peace and Dialogue has developed this method. And we have worked with that for over 30 years, and it started actually during the war in the Balkans, where we invited people during the war to Norway, to Lillehammer, where our center is. And then from that time, we developed this method, which is way practical. And everything what we will tell you today is based on practical experiences through all these years. So we called this our webinar, this presentation for the dialogue approach, and we called it a communicative tool for change. And for us, this is perhaps one of the most important things here when it comes to dialogue, that dialogue is a tool for change. And it's on an individual level, and it's also on a collective level. So this is what we want to underline. So we will start with an overview over what we think dialogue is, how it works, our experiences, and then we will also talk about something special which we have developed the last 6-7 years, which is public dialogues. So we come back to that, but first let us start from the beginning. So let's start with the definition. So for us, dialogue is a process of genuine interaction, which human beings listen to each other deeply enough to be changed by what they learn. So there already we have this change thing. So we think that when people listen in a different way to each other, in a way where they only have to listen, they do not need to prepare their arguments against what the other is saying. They just have to listen, that something might change inside them, that they change their way of thinking, their way of, or later perhaps also their behavior. So this is that each of them makes a serious effort to take others' concerns into her or his own picture, even when disagreements persist. So it's dialogue. The goal with dialogue is not necessarily an agreement. It could be, but it might also help you to live with disagreements. So this is something we also want to underline, that dialogue might help us to live in a community where there always will be disagreements. But no one needs to give up his or her identity. This is something I think it's quite important here. Only for 2 days ago, I had an interreligious dialogue about sexuality. It was quite interesting, and there were people from the Catholic Church, Muslims, different Protestant churches, and also secular, also people from a secular organization. And it was while I was facilitating the dialogue, I was thinking, this is actually wonderful. We are talking about something very vulnerable like sexuality, and still we talked together here, or they were talking together, and they were disagreeing on many points, but they were also listening to each other. So I think this is the power of dialogue, and this gives us the possibility also to learn something new. So we do not give up anything in our identities, but we also recognize enough the other valid human claims that he or she will act differently toward each other. So we see that we are different, we accept that, and at the same time, or we respect it, but we don't need to accept what they think, what they believe in. But we have to respect it and to perhaps also to live with these disagreements. So that's the definition. So what is the purpose? So we do think that the purpose of dialogue is that we want to address complex social problems, prevent and transform conflicts. And we all live in a complex context in all societies in the world, I would say. And we need to approach these problems. And many of them, in many situations, we think that there's only one solution. It is right or wrong, black and white, but the world is much more complex than that. And so we do think that dialogue can help us to approach these quite complex social contexts we have to live in. And we can also, with using dialogue, prevent and transform conflicts. I will come back to that. The participants of a dialogue, these are the community society that are part of the reason of the problem, or therefore have to be part of the solution. So this is a very humble approach, which I personally actually admire in this dialogue, because it's not up down, it's inclusive. We are together on it. So we invite people on from a certain community to participate in a dialogue about a problem they might have, like this group of these in these interreligious dialogues where they want to talk about vulnerable topics like sexuality and how to deal with that in different religious communities. So the dialogue process is open and inclusive. So everyone, not in all dialogues, it depends on what kind of dialogue is, but those who are affected by or who have a problem or have a topic they want to talk about, they are invited. And it's allowing to build trust, because it's a quite equal ground. Or this is what we at least try to do, so that people feel that they are met with equality. And it's not necessary that they have to, dialogue in the end will have a solution, but it can be. It's up to the group, because it's the facilitator is just giving this space for them to talk to each other, but it's up to the participants to decide if they want to work out a solution, or to find to have a plan for what they want to do in the future. So it's open and inclusive. One of our previous colleagues, he developed this dialogue debate comparison. And because when he went around the world and talked about dialogue, he found out that many people saw that dialogue is debate. Also in Norway, this is very common, that when we talk about dialogue, people say, oh yeah, we have a dialogue, but in the end, it's not a dialogue, because they're just arguing against each other. So he did this, and he said that in a debate, the goal is to win. Meanwhile, in a dialogue, the goal is to understand the other better. And through this understanding, they might be perhaps in the future be able to work together, or to figure out things, or to coexist. So what happens in a debate is that we try to convince the other with our arguments. And meanwhile, in a dialogue, you will explain And this is quite different approach. As when you explain something, it's not for winning something. You're just explaining your thoughts, and you use a different language, and you use also a different tone of voice, and also your body language might be different. So in a debate, you will argue. In a dialogue, you will listen, as we said in the beginning. And in a debate, you want to win this debate. So you look for the weak argument. Is there any weak argument there which I can go against and argue against? Perhaps they use wrong facts, so you might go against these types of facts and so on. But in the dialogue, what we try to develop, which is not from the first second that will happen, but over time, that we will try to look for the strengths in the opponent. Because if you want to have an open and honest conversation, which is our goal in a dialogue, then you actually need to empower each other. Because when we feel weak, we will not talk openly. But if we feel empowered and we feel that we are safe, then we might also be able to open up about some way vulnerable ideas and thoughts. In a debate, we will hunt again for these arguments. We will see, is it any possibility here for come in to go against it, to fight against. So it's in a way this fighting modus against another person. Meanwhile, in a dialogue, we need self-discipline, because listening is very difficult. And I know that you know that, because you're working with dialogue. And me and Siri, we are often working together as facilitators in these public dialogues. And I must say, sometimes it's so difficult to sit there 2 hours and really listen, so attentive as we have to do, to really catch what the other is saying right now. So this is in the need of a huge portion of self-discipline. In a debate, as you know, we will judge each other. And meanwhile, in a dialogue, we try to be more tolerant. And I am not talking about, I'm not 100% tolerant. I'm not tolerating everything, but I try to work on that the whole time. And I have limits of tolerance, and we are not thinking that, okay, the participants of dialogue, in the end, they will be 100% tolerant towards each other. But it's more to work on it and to see, can I go a little bit further in my tolerance, or have I reached my limit? In a debate, you will make the opponent insecure, because that will perhaps help you then again to win this debate. Meanwhile, in a dialogue, you will try that everyone feels safe. Again, if you feel safe, if you feel secure, you will open much more up. If you don't feel like that, you will close down. In a debate, you will the change of opinion is a sign of weakness. If Siri suddenly change totally her opinion about something, then I would say, what is going on now, in a debate modus? While in a dialogue, when she's doing that, it's a sign of maturity. She has listened and she has reflected on what she has listened to, and then she might say, okay, now I think you're right, Christiane. Yes, I follow you. It's I didn't think like that before, but now I understand better what you are talking about. And in a debate, you also have this confronting language. In a dialogue, as you know, you probably do also in your dialogues, you have a supportive language, and it starts by sitting in a circle, and then you can watch each other, see each other better, and you also try to open up with your whole body. So we have some principles in our trainings. We also work a lot on these principles because we think they are quite important. So the first one, which I have mentioned before, is this inclusiveness. So, and I said in the previous slide that we do think that this is also quite humble, because what I have seen in many places is that there are always experts who are coming to decide what people have to do. So if there is any problem somewhere in the community, there's somebody coming and saying, do this or that. Someone who is designed as an expert. In dialogue, we don't have any experts. We are experts of our lives. And your life, my life experience is equally important, like Siri's life experience. And I'm much older than Siri, but still she has her experiences, and I'm humble and I'm respectful for what she has experienced. So we also have, I have also used dialogue in some intergenerational dialogues, which has been very interesting, because then some of those adults like me also meet the younger generation in a much more respectful way, which I consider as very important for developing our communities. So it doesn't matter if you are young or old, if you are black or white, if you are Muslim or Christian or whatever. All those who are think they want to talk about a certain topic are invited to be part of it. So when they are first invited and they are there, what the facilitator will work on is to create a joint ownership, because what we want is change. So and little and bigger changes, but since we don't believe in this idea of to have an expert there who decides what to do or not to do, then the group has to take the ownership for it. So they have to take the ownership for that problem. If they have a problem with a neighborhood because there is a lot of parties going on, because they're younger and older generations living together in a close neighborhood, then this neighborhood has to take ownership for that. It doesn't help that somebody is coming and say, now stop to make partying, but this perhaps it will stop for a while, but then they will start again, because we are humans. You know, if we don't feel ownership, if we don't feel responsible for this neighborhood, and for everyone who lives there, then we will not change anything.
And this is maybe it seems very obvious, but it is actually, at least for me, one of the hardest things to really work on, because I think a lot of us forget, and we don't reflect on how when we were children, our parents just told us what to do. Then we go to school and the teacher tells us what to do and what is correct and what is good and bad. And we kind of grow up not having ownership in our choices, in our problems, in the same way as we maybe should. So this is a lot of unlearning as well, to come and really try and take ownership and not blame the others in the dialogue or the others outside the dialogue, because that is much easier, of course, to just put the blame on someone else.
Very important. And then from this ownership, so when the group, and this might take a lot of time, you know, it's not done by just like this, especially when there has been a conflict for a long time. But when this ownership is created and people really understand that it's them who have to do something, then this learning process can start. So it's about we call it minds unfolding. So dialogue creates an opportunity for learning through self-reflection. So I reflect on what I was thinking. Okay, I'm one of these older people living in this neighborhood, and I'm saying, why are these young people the whole time just partying here? You know, they can go in a bar or whatever, you know, but then I can perhaps learn that they do not have so much money to go to a bar. So for them, it's much cheaper to do it at home. So then we have to figure out what to do, you know, how can we coexist in this situation? And then all this is based on humanity. So we want to create, but before all this can happen, we need to have this safe and trustful space, which also develops the whole time, because this is not only about the facts that there is partying going on in neighborhood, it's also about feelings, emotions, and desires and intentions, which we also need to talk about. And then it's very important to have a long-term perspective. And I talk long-term, it might be years or months, or it depends on what process is going on. But for obtaining change, sustainable change, we need time. So all this is based also, what we also try to do in a dialogue is to get a more congruent communication. So I don't know if you know this picture, this imagine of an iceberg, where you have this water line, or what is it called? Yeah, water line, where you have under that, you have intentions, feelings, values, early experiences, prejudice, norms. So this is all this what you can't see in us humans. So when we do something, when we address a situation, perhaps almost we have an intention behind what we are saying. My intention might be I want to contribute to some positive change. My intention could be that I want to disrupt the whole process because I'm not interested in any change. Or my intention is that I'm not interested in that at all. And behind that, there is some feelings, values. Perhaps it's the reason why I don't want to engage in that process in this neighborhood with this partying is because I have no energy, or I have been in such processes before and they never worked out because they're always the loudest who talk and who get heard. So there's so many things going on in myself before I actually do something as a behavior which others can see. So what we try to do in dialogue is, this is very much the work of the facilitator, we will come back to that next time, is that we try to help people to talk in a more congruent way, where their verbal and non-verbal messages not conflict with each other, because our non-verbal messages, our non-verbal language is based on this part which is under the water, the line, our intention, feelings, values. Our body shows that way fast, and some people have a more clear body language, others are more hidden, but in a way you will feel it when you are together with other people. So what we need is to talk, we need to check in with ourselves when we are before we actually say something, to check in, how do I actually feel about this situation? And what is my intention in this context? And why do I say this? Is it because I feel afraid? Is it because I don't like these people? So to be more honest with yourself, because if you can't be honest with yourself, how can you be honest with others? I think that's impossible. And this is something we try to help people in a dialogue to work on, so that they are more aware of what is going on inside me and how does this situation affect me in that moment, and how can I then be more clear in my communication. So just one slide about, because I have worked for many years, I have been in Poland many times, and what I have experienced there, it might not be for you, but at least what I have experienced before, is there might be some confusion between what is dialogue and mediation. So I just wanted to bring it in here. So for us, as I said, dialogue is understanding of the others, and in mediation, it's more, also, there's also an understanding part there, but it's also more finding a solution. I know that there are a lot of mediation schools, so there are also different approaches when it comes to mediation. But I tried now here just to bring it together. What I see now, it's where's Rice here.
Oh.
So I hope you see it, because what is written here under mediation, the rest here is actually what should have been under dialogue. And yes, sorry for that. But in dialogue, we focus on underlying root causes and try to bring out feelings, needs related to the conflict or to the situation. So the focus in dialogue is transforming through deeper understanding. In mediation, now you have to look under the dialogue part. The mediator will have a set of questions which will lead the participants to a solution in the end. And feelings and needs will also be addressed often, but there is more a focus, as I said, on solution. Yeah. So how it is organized in dialogue, there is an impartial, or we call it actually multi-partial mediator, not mediator, but we call it facilitator. Now it's actually, there's something happened here. I don't know what went wrong, but there's a multi-partial facilitator. And then in the dialogue, how we use it, we have then ground rules made by the parts of the conflict. And then you have a neutral space, which is then organized in chairs. In a mediation, you have also an impartial mediator, and they also do have some guiding rules for the process. So in a dialogue, the outcome would be then a short-term increased understanding, and in the long-term change of attitude and behavior, which can lead to solutions, but that's way up to the participants. So the facilitator will not lead the participants to a solution. It's up to them if they want to find a solution. And there is also a special type of questions in the way how we use dialogue, which are these following up questions. We will come back to them next time. And in the mediation, it's more the solution that everyone can live with, achieved through a mediated process with pre-prepared leading questions. So they have often a set of questions. But as I said, there are a lot of mediation schools, and you might know others. But so that was much more like on general basis.
And just to see, I see that some people have written in the Q&A, so we will address these questions afterwards, just so you know we're not ignoring.
No. Great. So we have this model which we so now we are talking, as we said, there is dialogue is a communication tool which we use for preventing and transforming conflict, and it's also used for talking about things which are not necessarily conflict-based, but we will come back to that when Siri will talk about public dialogues. But the conflict-based dialogues, for explaining it, what dialogue is, we use also this what is it called? Model. It's called 5 Ways to Approach a Conflict, where you can see there is, on one side, you have this concern for goals, which is high or low, and on the underlying, you have this concern for relationships. So there are 5 ways how you can approach. This model says there's 5 ways how you can approach a conflict. Which one is there, which you can see on my left side, my way, where you control the situation. So this might be a situation where you have power to control it. You can say, we do like I want because I know what to do. You might be in a power position. You might be the leader of something, and then you just take it and decide what to do. In this case, the concern for goals is way high, but the concern for the relationships is way low. So you can of course do that, but if you do that the whole time, it might end with that you lose the relationships. You lose your team if you are a leader, because you always just decide without discussing the topic with them. there's another way, which is also on my left side, which is no way, where you actually avoid the conflict. And this is many situations I'm avoiding conflicts because I don't have the energy to go into it. I don't feel I'm really part of it, or I don't even see it. I can, and in this case, you are not concerned about your goals and not concerned about the relationships. If you always, especially I would say in relationships, close relationships, perhaps with your partner or your children, always are avoiding conflicts, there will be no development. And the relationship might also stagnate. So as you know, you need also conflicts for development. If you're always avoiding them, there is no. I would say there is no development. Then you have on my right side, you have your way, where you actually say, okay, we do as you want. Sometimes I will do that, but if I always do that, of course, I will care for the relationship in a way, but will I also care of my needs, or will I always just put my needs on the second level, that I'm not concerned about my own needs? Perhaps I don't even know my own needs. And it might be nice for the relationship in a way, but over long term, it might also destroy the relationship, because if I always deny my own needs, something will also happen with me. Something will happen with the relationship, and something will happen with me, because I might, in the longer run, be very frustrated, and in the end blame my partner or my kids for that frustration. But it's actually about me, because I do not take care of my own needs, and I'm not able to front my needs towards the others. And then you have halfway, which is compromise. And this is what we very often do, at least I often do. And this is a way where you get half and half. You get something, the other gets the same, 50-50, which is often might be a very good solution for in many conflict situations. And here I would say mediation comes in. What we try to do in a dialogue, where dialogue is based, here is our way. So we want to find out a win-win situation where everyone feels that they can win something. And it doesn't mean, let's say Siri and I have a conflict, and it doesn't mean that she gets 50% and I get 50%. Perhaps she gets 80%, and of what she was looking for in the situation. But I am perhaps happy with that, because I have understood her, and then it's okay for me, because then I say, okay, yes, it's not so important for me. But through talking and through listening to her, and she listening to me, and that she is respecting me, and she actually acknowledged me, that is enough for me. So I can actually give her the whole, and I'm still satisfied. So this is the way how we try to work with dialogue in a conflict situation. So how does dialogue work? So what we think is that dialogue offers individuals and communities a variety of benefits. And we think there are three distinct interrelated parts of who can be affected by dialogue, which is our intellect, emotions, and our spirit. So on the intellectual way, we would say that dialogue exposes us for people and different ways of seeing the world. And we for example, for not some weeks ago, we had a dialogue at our center about dilemmas in peace and war. And the background, of course, for that dialogue, a public dialogue, was the war in Ukraine. And that was actually where there were 40 people there, or 40 or 50 people, different ages, different backgrounds. And it was very, very interesting as to be the facilitator for that, and to really to discover that we can see the world in so different ways, and these dilemmas of peace and war. And so in situations where the space for having different opinions, or have to be able to express different opinions in the public space is very limited, dialogue can actually make a difference there, and can give a space where this is possible, because it's not only based on facts, it's also based on our emotions. And when it comes to the question of peace and war, I think there are only dilemmas. And to address these dilemmas, I think that's a way where we can learn something new. You have the possibility to rethink your understanding. And that particular dialogue on dilemmas in peace and war, it made a change in me. So it made it actually even more clear for me how complicated the whole situation is, which I think is important, because when this feeling of not knowing, to being unsure a little bit about a certain situation, I think it makes me more humble. If I'm way like, this is how it has to be, then how can I then actually listen to others who have totally different opinions? So to work on my own humility, this is something which dialogue can give us. And then we can also recognize the potential validity of different viewpoints. And this is, I have seen in so many dialogues, and we have seen it, we have had a lot of public dialogues, that what this does with people, if you get acknowledged, if you have perhaps a viewpoint which is not the common viewpoint on a certain topic in that moment in the public space, and then you get acknowledged for that, you get validated, your thoughts get validated, people really grow, you can see the growth in them during a dialogue. There's also emotions, and as you know, we are not rational. Humans are not rational. We are so how can I say it? We are so our emotions are there the whole time. So we need to understand also our emotional reactions, and we need to understand it first in ourselves, and then to connect to the others. And emotions we all do have emotions, but of course they are contextual. So I might have different emotions about a certain topic than Siri does have, but I know what it means to be sad, and I can connect to Siri's sadness if she is expressing her sadness. And this is how we link people together, how we humanize others. And this is what dialogue can do. And this can increase my empathy for others. Even I still think that they are so different from me. I'm totally disagreeing with them, but still I might empathize with them. And there's a spiritual part here, because what we try to do in a dialogue, also with a group where there are a lot of disagreements, there might be an underlying conflict, that they start to care about each other. Because we, in hardcore discussions or debates, you easily define the other as your enemy, or somebody you never would take a coffee with because you are so disagreeing with that person. But we are in the end all humans, and we need to coexist, and this feeling of also feeling this, that I need to care for that person, is something which can help us in that process. And then this again can create a sense of community connectedness, that, okay, we can't, okay, I can leave, I can find another apartment and live in another place, so I avoid all this partying, all these young people, but I can't always leave the problems. Sometimes I need to face them and I need to do something. So we would say that this caring approach is for us a spirit of dialogue that we want to achieve. So how does it affect us? It gives us, my experience is that it gives more personal reflection and clarity. And this is based on many feedbacks we have got from groups. We develop more empathy for others, and especially for those who we perceive as an outer group. And we get an increased understanding of a different truth, because we all have our truths, which is we will fight for, but in this case, we try to understand it. We reduce divisions by reflecting on our shared humanity and common ground. And we might build sense of community. We absolutely will improve our communication. And I had a talk yesterday with a filmmaker. She is making also film about in a quite polarized society in the US, and polarized about the question of climate change, and she wanted in her film to show how dialogue could work in such a context. And she attended our training in February, and she said that gave her a totally new insight in how to approach quite extreme groups about this topic of climate change, where there were very extreme opinions in that community where they were doing their film project. So she had, after being in the training and working more with dialogue, with this dialogue method, how we are teaching it, she said that she got so many new ideas how to make this film and how to approach those groups, these more extreme groups. And she said it improved very much her communication skills, because she got much more aware of how important questions are and how you ask questions, how you formulate them, how you connect with your inner life, what is your driving force when you are asking these questions. And it also helps us to a collective analysis for developing change process. So when you sit together, and I remember a dialogue we had about integration of refugees in a local municipality in Norway, and then that was in 2015 when the Syrian refugees came, and then how the community themselves, they started to think about what should we change, how could we approach it, and also could address their fears of again receiving quite a big group of refugees to a small community. So again, this ownership, to take ownership of something, helps also the people to get empowered and to take action. So when is dialogue useful from our experience? We would say it's useful in decision-making processes. For example, this is example of this municipality who had to receive quite a number of refugees. So the decisions were not made during the dialogue, this 3-hour dialogue, but it inspired them to do decisions. They actually connected with each other. There were two people who working in different non-governmental organizations participating in that dialogue. And they, after the dialogue, started to talk. What can they do together? So it's also, you get connected with people with whom you haven't worked together before. You can talk about challenging and controversial topics in a different way, because you don't argue. You do not argue against each other. You don't comment each other. So you listen, you ask questions, and that gives a totally different way, a possibility to talk about quite controversial topics. It can be used in conflict situations, as we said, and also in preventing polarization and exclusion. We have worked a lot with minority groups in Norway, or with minority groups, and I have seen how many people have changed through this, participating in these dialogue processes, because they felt that they, for the first time, perhaps have been listened to. Yes, and then we need some preconditions for this dialogue process. We have to be sure that there is no immediate decision need to made. Because we need time. It's time consuming, these processes. We need relatively balanced power. So if the power balance is very unequal, then it might be difficult to use the dialogue methodology. We need similarity in perceived language capacity, enough time. We need multi-partial trained facilitators, a safe and neutral space, and we need to analyze the situation to prevent that no one is harmed by the process. And we need to think in a long term about it. So when we design dialogue process, now I'm talking not only of one dialogue and then over, but a process in a community where you work over time. Then we need to establish common intentions and norms with those who are requiring this dialogue. They need then to share experience and perceptions when they are together, getting aware of the differences and disagreements, and then exploring the possibilities for what we can do together. And now, we will say a little bit about public dialogues.
Yes.
And how we use that.
And I will talk a little bit more about the differences between conflict-based and public dialogue afterwards. But as Christiane said, after many years with this method, most of the time we worked in groups in kind of smaller invited spaces, and then also teaching a lot of people to kind of spread the dialogue method. And then some of these people, a group outside of Oslo, actually, of women, started kind of asking us and thinking about why can't we take this out to the public? Because we're learning so many things. We're doing so much work on ourselves through these methods, but we feel like we come home to our families, to our husbands, and we don't know how to share it. So maybe there are different kind of variations of this method other places as well, for sure. But what it's called it's public dialogue, and simply put, it's a type of dialogue that is for the people, for the public, for like normal people, common people, not just a specific group that are invited because either of their problem or their conflict or the situation that they are in, but for everyone who wants, is the idea. And they are often organized in a public space. We usually try to figure out a way to find a place that has some type of collective ownership or collective feeling. So a library, town hall, a school, a center. It depends on the place you are in, but for example, if there's an interreligious public dialogue, like Christiane talked about earlier, most likely it wouldn't be a kind of a collective place if it isn't one of the religious spaces like a church, for example, but there are many religions presented. But it could be if the participants choose that everyone is fine with the church. But we try to find kind of a neutral ground that this is also about the principles of inclusion. That, for example, at least in Norway, a library is very commonly used by people of all parts of the society, also lower income, a lot of families that, or people who maybe don't have somewhere to go in the daytime, they go to the library. So for us, like a library is a good example of where people will feel welcome. Maybe a town hall, some places are not that place, you know? So it depends on the group. And then it's an open invitation. So it would be kind of, you announce it in Facebook and websites with posters. Normally, if it's this kind of public event, and anyone who wants to come can join. The only limitation concerning numbers is just the space. How many chairs do we have space for? And then a public dialogue is very often about a specific topic, a title and a topic that someone wants to talk about or the community needs to talk about. And it is often chosen by the ones who want this gathering to happen. So usually that is an organizer or a group, or could also be like an organization or a library or a municipality organ that asks us to come and have a public dialogue. And they are then part of choosing the topic, because if me and Christiane come to the north of Norway, we don't know the context there. We're not familiar with the community. And then this local partner knows perhaps what is going on in the media or what has happened here that we need to talk about. This topic can contain, often it contains conflicts or conflictual things, polarizing elements, but it doesn't necessarily have to be about a specific conflict where there's someone on this side and someone on that side. It can be, very often we use it for very sensitive topics, very personal topics. For example, in our hometown, or where the center is located in Lillehammer, we used this method when the municipality put down these stones to commemorate Jewish people that were taken and killed in the Holocaust, that are all over Europe. You probably also you have them. And with this kind of event that these stones were put down in the city, which is just last year, so it's very late. That was the space where they also asked, we need to have this public dialogue because it is such a difficult topic. So we want to make sure that the conversation we have as a community follows certain guidelines and can be respectful and open and understanding, instead of going into some polarized debate. Sometimes we organize series of public dialogues where the same people may come multiple times, but they don't have to. We did this after or during actually the COVID pandemic, where we saw also, probably in Poland and most other countries, the pandemic increased a lot of polarization. It created a lot of hate speech, and inequality became quite kind of aware in the society how different people live their lives. And this method, we went around the country, had public dialogues about the pandemic in different kind of thematical ways, to also give people a space to kind of collectively go through what they have experienced, to be listened to, and also to prevent further escalation of tension and harmful tension, I should say. And in these series of public dialogues, then there's more possibilities for participants to actually be a part of choosing the topics. But if you have like a one-time event, which we also normally very often do with this public dialogue, then the topic is decided beforehand by the organizer, and with the facilitators as kind of guides on that. So very shortly, we talked a little bit, Christiana talked about the purpose of dialogue in general. And with public dialogues, it's very much the same. But of course, you want people, you could also say, you could say goal or purpose, but you want people to talk in a non-argumentative and open-minded way. And you spend a lot of time on that, and you kind of focus their attention. They don't have to do anything else during the time together, the 2 hours together, other than this, and then it's a success. If you have moments where people really come there and try to be open-minded, very often nobody knows what's going to happen before they come. They've maybe never heard about public dialogue, let alone dialogue in the sense that we use the word. So this takes a lot of time, and for a lot of people, it's quite like groundbreaking experiences to understand and to realize how much we discuss and debate and argue in our daily lives. And then, of course, the purpose is also to understand and to highlight different perceptions and beliefs in a community. So this is also part of this conflict prevention and de-escalation, that increased understanding is the main goal as in dialogue, but you also want to highlight it. So the inclusiveness principle is very, very important in public dialogues, because at least when we, the Nansen Center, have organized, for example, a panel discussion on a topic, very oftentimes there's a certain type of person that comes there, that feel comfortable in that space, that likes to talk politics, that is involved in society and maybe listens to the news every day, and who maybe is very academic, who has an academic background. Maybe it's also more older people who feel like they have a lot of knowledge about different things. And then there's certain people who don't feel necessarily, even though they're in theory, they're welcome to this panel, they don't necessarily feel welcome, and they don't feel like they can talk, because who am I to know? I don't know anything about the Holocaust in Norway, so I can't say anything about, for example, the stepping stones that we put down, or I'm new in Lillehammer, so this is not for me, or I'm young and I should just come and listen. And like Christiana said, we're so used to these experts coming all the time. So public dialogue is also a lot about lifting up these different perspectives and making sure that the participants really understand that this is a space where different types of knowledge is welcome. It doesn't have to be a specific type of academic knowledge, or just personal experience and bodily knowledge, and all those things are equally important in the dialogue. And then, of course, to foster learning and initiate social changes is often the purpose of public dialogue. And these can be different for everyone involved in the dialogue, but they still often happen. And of course, living in disagreement is a muscle, I think, that we need to train. So it's also a possibility to practice to view disagreements and as a positive sign for development, rather than something we have to live despite of, or have to get away from, or that we can't have disagreement in small communities. And there's many uses for public dialogue, but some of the most common ones that we see and that we use and that people ask us for is to have these inclusive and democratic meeting places for everyone. Like I mentioned earlier, a panel discussion or a town hall even, or a public meeting very often doesn't feel so inclusive and democratic for many of the people. So this is some of the goals for the public dialogue, or using it. Like I mentioned, conflict prevention and peace building for sure. Sometimes Norwegians come to us maybe a little bit arrogantly and says, "Oh, but you don't work here because we have a peaceful society. You probably work in other countries, right?" But it is, as you guys probably know, it's all about kind of community development and making sure that harmful tension and destructive conflict doesn't escalate, and that you actually poke a hole in the balloon that is growing and growing of polarization or isolated opinions and all those things. Because one of the points about public dialogues is also actually just to meet physically and see other people that have other opinions or experiences face to face, which is not a given anymore with social media and debate cultures online, that you really just sit across from them in a circle and have to view them as a human being. And then, it can also be the basis for making difficult decisions, like Christiane mentioned before. It can be used to uplift neglected and suppressed voices and perspectives. So not necessarily to give people a voice, but to make the space for their voice to come through. So oftentimes we have politicians a part of the dialogue, but they have to sit in the circle like everyone else, and they have to listen to other people explain how their life is affected by the politics in the community. It opens the possibility for co-determination, and it also explores the topics without these experts and these panels, like I already mentioned. And then outcomes that we have seen, and that is also, of course, some of it has been written about more academically, but what we experience is increased empowerment in the community, increased involvement for sure, diffusing destructive conflict and harmful tension, more sustainable solutions, like Christiane mentioned, that if you have joint ownership of a situation, there's a more likelihood that the solution or the thing you figure out together will last. If there's just an expert coming in and saying, okay, we have to divide the street here and here because of the neighbor issues, people won't feel the need to continue this deal when some expert leaves, and very often solutions fall apart. It can create coordinated actions, healthy coexistence, and strengthening citizenship and responsibility and sense of responsibility in groups and communities. So very quickly, just some differences because these are the two types of kind of dialogues that we do. Some public dialogues are also very closed, not so open to the public, like more topic dialogues. But the similarities are that both types of dialogues initiate learning processes. They have a need for neutral and secure physical spaces. And these principles that we talked about, equality, openness, respect, and humility, are key elements in both processes. You need, at least in our opinion, a multi-partial facilitator in both types of dialogue work, and the ground rules are always indispensable. In the public dialogue, they're already made out, because if you have 80 people, for example, it's going to take a long time having a process to decide ground rules. But with the conflict transformation tool, using dialogue in that sense, then we usually make the participant make the ground rules themselves. The differences, some of the differences are that conflict-based dialogues need a lot more preparation in time and with the different parties. So we would go to the different places, different homes, have tea with the different parties of a conflict, and create this trust so that maybe they will end up meeting in the end. But with the public dialogue, we don't need that much preparation. We don't know who's going to come most of the time, which also creates a lot of difficulty, or it's a different challenge for a facilitator that we will probably talk about next time. And then the conflict-based dialogues will often be a part of a very long-term process with the same group of people, where public dialogues can be a one-time event with people, random people. Mm. The number of people is often quite limited in a conflict-based dialogue, just to make sure that you're able to create the safe space to have this trust with all the different parties, and that they're also selected very consciously. But in an open dialogue is just the space that limits. We have had dialogues with open public dialogues with 10 people and with 100 people. Public dialogues are more inclusive than conflict-based dialogues. In the public dialogue, there's, in theory, no limitation to who are allowed to be there, which is also sometimes can create challenges in terms of this discussion of non-platforming, and should people with very extreme views be able to talk, you know? But in the public dialogue, the principle is that, at least how we work with it, that you can come, you have to follow the rules, the same as everyone else. You can't try and spoil the process. But if you do, and everyone is aware that now we're going to have a difficult conversation where unpopular opinions may be raised, then there's no necessarily a limitation to who can come. Of course, we don't accept hate speech and these things, but that is part of the ground rules, you know. And then the topic of the dialogue, as I said earlier, is mostly decided beforehand in the public dialogues, but whereas in a conflict-based dialogue, the topic or the kind of focus of the conversation is decided much more by the participants. And in the public dialogue, you can include introductions and a public dialogue on the stage before the normal dialogue, cultural performances, etc. So it's more of a kind of an event experience as well. So that is a little bit to show the differences, but I'm sure we will also next time come much more into these differences for sure when it comes to the facilitation. So yes, that concludes what we wanted to share for this time.
Yes, how to practice that. It's I would say that it's a long life a challenge, task. So because as a human, I develop the whole time, and my package of feelings, early experiences, my values, norms change, of course, and the package, especially of early experience, get bigger and bigger when you get older. And so what for me, it's impossible to be a congruent communicator 24 hours. So it's more that I try when I have the feeling that this is a situation, let's say I'm not a facilitator, but as a human, I'm in a situation which is it's complicated, or I can see there is a certain conflict. Then I get aware of it, and then I start to connect with that, with my inner Christiane. So it's a mental exercise actually, which has to be because normally our brain works in the way that we are not conscious about what we are doing. We are just doing things because we know what to do. We walk, we talk, we go to the shop or so on. But then when we come in situations which might be challenging, then this conscious part of our brain starts to work, or we have to connect to this conscious part of our brain. And this is what I mean. Then I have to think and to connect and reflect. Why is this situation affecting me in such an emotional way? Is it something I have experienced before? Is it because I have prejudice here, or I feel fear, or I'm these things? So this is the way. So it's actually an active. You have to actively connect with your inner life to be a congruent communicator.
And I would also say that as facilitators, for us, one thing we try to do, especially when we have more preparations with the participants, is we do a lot of this identity work and try and make them, not to push it on them, not to tell them what they're thinking, but to enable them to be in touch with parts of their identity. And we have different exercises that we do, like the onion that maybe some of you know of, where you go from a position to an interest to what is your need beneath your position. But then also I would say that because this is very hard work, like Christiane said, that it's also the facilitator's job, by asking the types of questions that will help the participants to kind of unpack what they are saying. Why are you saying the things you're saying? To ask follow-up questions so that you go away from these very strong positions, and it kind of unfolds in the dialogue what their needs, what their perceptions, what their principles are. They have to kind of explain that without it being very confrontational. But it's a lot about the questions that are asked by the facilitator, I would say, that help people to be more aware of this.
How I understand it, I think this is also in our trainings. We talk a lot about these terms, which are very common, like respect. I respect each other. What does it mean to respect someone? So for me, respect is foundation for equality. I say, if there is no respect, I think there is no equality. It has to be part of it. I can't. So for me, respect means, and I think for me, it doesn't matter what it's written in the books, what respect is. It's what I think respect is, what is important, or Siri, or the other participants. And for me personally, respect is something to really try to see the other person as a human. And I disagree totally. I might be in deep conflict with that person, but still I respect you because you also are a human being. And this gives me the foundation for creating an equal ground. And as a facilitator, that's super important, because we also have worked with, not often, but sometimes we have participants who might be very extreme in their positions, their thinking, but I still have to respect them. And so it challenged me very much to then still respect that person as a human and as a person who has a right to express themselves. And again, through that, I can create this equal ground. I think also another term which is important when it comes to equality and respect is power. So that makes it even more difficult if you to create equality in a space where the power dimensions are uneven. Yeah.
And we wouldn't tell people, you have to respect each other, this is what it means. We will only focus on trying to unpack, what do you think respect is? What do you think respect is? And then that can also be part of really unpacking kind of important things. Is suddenly you realize that participants have a very different understanding of what respect is, and that's maybe part of the problem and things like that. So we always ask about these big words that we now used in the presentation. We ask the participants, what do they mean? If they use those words, we investigate that.
And we do think that the facilitator is also an example. So you can't expect more from the participant what you are expecting from yourself. Also, if you expect something from the participants, you have to practice it first. So if I want that the participants treat each other with humility, I have to be humble. If I want to create a respectful atmosphere, I have to treat everyone with respect, and they will feel that. And we have got a lot of comments on that from our dialogues, that people see it. Also, how we treat each other when we are true, for example, Siri and me, how do we talk with each other, treat each other while we are facilitating? People are observing that, and it shows them. So first and foremost, we have to practice it, and then we can give it to the group. Yes, we do. And Siri can say it. We have actually only 3.
We have 3. Sometimes I change them a little bit depending on the kind of group I'm guessing will come or whatever, the preparation. But we try. It's like a fine line, because you need authority, but you don't, like you probably already know, you need authority, but not in a very teacher way. So it's also how you phrase these rules. But one of the rules we often use, we try to make them very simple, very short, and very few, especially for a public dialogue where they just come for a one-time event. So one of the ones we use a lot is that we try to listen to understand. So in that we get in the rule can be try to listen, or listen to understand. to always remind people that you're not just hearing what other people are saying, but you're really focusing your attention on what they're saying to be able to understand their perceptions. Then another rule that we have, we use a lot, is you're not allowed to argue or comment on what people are saying. And especially in Norway, this thing about commenting, a lot of people are wondering about. They get a bit stressed. Then I can't say anything, then can I not speak my mind? But it is very different if you feel that if Christiana is sitting, explaining a very vulnerable situation for her, maybe opening up a little bit, and someone comments immediately right after on what she's saying. Instead of asking questions, instead of maybe sharing their experiences, what they think about when they hear what Christiana is saying, if they say, yes, Christiana said that that this is a problem in the neighborhood, but I actually think, then immediately her truth, her experience can be felt as devaluated. And the whole purpose is that we try to have this self-discipline to not argue against each other and to not comment. So if that happens, the facilitator will often ask the person, can you please rephrase that in a question? Or how has that been for you? To try and speak on behalf of yourself, which is also another rule that we often use, to speak on behalf of yourself. And this is also connected to this power question, because there will be people who maybe are leaders in the community and politicians and someone who comes and say, I'm from this political party. And then they have to try and speak as city, not as the principal, and the mayor. Because that is just something they can hide behind. And they can say, but the school thinks this. That's not something we allow in the public dialogue. So these are the rules that I think we use most. I don't know if there's any other you would.
No, we have changed it a little bit in between, but what now latest in this interreligious dialogue, I actually only had these three. But the one which I always use is do not argue or comment on each other, because this is very, very important. If you start to let that rule go, then you have a debate or the discussion.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's quite difficult not to end up in a discussion. So I say that not all public dialogues or not all dialogues are dialogues. Sometimes they are discussions, and there's a little moment where there's dialogue, then they go over to discussion, and you bring them back to a dialogue. And this still happens to me too. So it's complicated because people are not used to talk in this way, and they sometimes they also work against it. They don't want to go into it because they want to argue and so on. So it's quite a job to bring them there, but after a while it often works. I would say our experience is that through questions, that's the only thing, because as a facilitator you do not have so much tools, at least as we practice. As you have the ground rules, you have your authority and your integrity as a human, and then you have questions. And these questions, we will go into that in the next webinar over the roles of facilitator. These are special type of questions. I guess you know this because you work with dialogue. So these are only following up questions. So we will never, ever come up with something which is not related to what the person is saying. For example, if Siri says, I'm so fed up of this discussion about climate change. And then the facilitator would ask, what do you mean by fed up? So that she then can, and this is the way how and then she would say, no, I don't know, but I feel something about it, or I don't know. And then you go again, you try very calm and very to help them to express it, and then also to get connected to their feelings about it. So this is the way, the following up questions are our main tool. We have to help people to express them in a more congruent way.
Mm.
We have, during Corona, as the whole world did, we had online dialogues with Polish participants. And Siri might say what she was. I thought that, yes, it works, but it's totally different and when you are doing it in person. So if you can't do it in person, then it's better than nothing. But I still would prefer to do it in person.
Mm. And we saw some positive things, like the fact that you have to raise your hand, like it calms things down, things take slower, like you have more time to reflect. And that, for example, if there comes a cat and like it humanizes kind of the person in a very interesting way. But at least for us, we do not practice conflict-based dialogue digitally, because then the what's it called? Not foreground, but the do no harm principles and the risks are so much higher. And as a facilitator, you have much less control over the safe space and the trust. If you're sitting in the room, you can try and ensure trust. Someone starts to cry, you can address that situation in some way. You can look at them in the eyes. But in a conflict where there's so many, it's very quickly you lose trust in each other, in the facilitator. You have such a fine line. We don't practice digital conflict dialogues because of those things. We don't feel like we're able to ensure those principles. It's also about our integrity to say we can't do this online, but we have done a lot of topic-based and public dialogues, which has been great, but we, of course, prefer the physical way, but it also enables other people that maybe wouldn't be able to join to come. So I think we would like to do it sometimes, but most of the time physical. But yeah, that's topic and public dialogues. If it's led in a different way, then
no, actually it's not, and it's you know, there are situations where there is polarization in a community, and then you try to use dialogue to do something with that, and or radicalization. But in that, those who are radicalized, they are very difficult to get to the dialogue. This is our experience. So the recruiting job to bring those people together is very difficult. And we are not the one who have worked most with that. We have just occasionally worked with this, but there are organizations who are doing that. And they do it very systematically to get in contact with these groups that they might think are radicalized, or they are radicalized. So there you have to do a lot of pre-work to get, Siri mentioned that in dialogue, in public dialogues, there's not so much pre-work, but when it comes to these kind of dialogues, which are then topic-based, it might be a lot of work to get to this group and to get them on board. But when it comes to polarization, I would say, for example, this dilemmas in peace and war, which we had this dialogue, that was also a kind of dialogue in a very polarized situation here in Norway, where many people feel that they can't say what they actually think about the war and the response from the Western societies and also Norway. So in that case, it's even more important, these questions, you're asking, so that you really get people to say, because people are also here afraid to say their opinions. And when it comes to that topic, the Ukrainian war and so on. So there you have to be even more careful to think, how do I ask that question, that following up question, to help them to actually be able to express their opinions, because there has been a long time now in Norway where this was not actually it's allowed. It's nobody who says not doing it, but you feel you can't say it, because if you say it, then you might just get this response of that this is not the right opinion in this situation or whatever. I think in these polarized situations, dialogue is super important. And the participant of that particular dialogue said that also after the dialogue, that for them it was so important to get this space for once to be heard and to talk in a different way about a very, very difficult situation. So I think, yes, but as I said, with radicalized groups, you need to work with recruitment. And I know there is an organization in, I think in English, they call themselves Peace House in Wrocław. And there is, yes, you know her, Adriana. And Maya and her team, they work with radicalized groups, as I know.
And I would also add that if I was organizing a public dialogue, and I know that this is a very polarizing topic where there will come people with a lot of polarized opinions, two things I would just make sure a lot is to have, especially in a public dialogues where people don't know about, they haven't had trainings or anything in dialogue, to spend enough time on explaining what dialogue is beforehand, to spend maybe 10 minutes on that and go through the ground rules and explain, so that the conversation starts off in a okay way, and also to make sure you have enough time. So very often we say, if someone comes and say, we want this 1 hour thing, but this is like an explosive topic, we will say no. We need at least 2, maybe 3 hours, maybe a whole day if there's like invited groups. So if you don't have enough time, you don't want to end up with the dialogue really coming out and things are coming out and people are really, because very often it's not harmonious. It's a lot of emotions, and maybe people are angry, and then you have to end it. So then you feel like you just created the polarization more and then you leave. So to have enough time is also very important with those dialogues.
Thank you so much. Thank you to you. Bye.
Thank you.